Life is a story we tell ourselves. I'm Anna Murphy. My father, Don Murphy, and I will be bringing stories to your family each week. We want to share stories with you that encourage us all to find the extraordinary in the ordinary through reminiscing and storytelling. Because life is a story we tell ourselves. This week, my father and I wanted to observe a moment of silence in honor of George Floyd and the countless other Americans who have suffered at the hands of racism and police brutality in our country. Thank you for joining us for that moment of silence. Now my father will introduce this week's guest.
Thank you, Anna, and welcome to the podcast, everyone. Today we have a very special guest speaking to us remotely from Chicago, director, writer, producer, master storyteller, and 26-time Emmy Award winner, Alphonzo Wesson, better known to his friends as Zoe. Welcome to the podcast, Zoe.
Don, I can't find the words to express how great it is to be in your virtual presence.
Great. Well, it's good to have you on the show. You know, I'm going to get started right away here. I have a question I've been aching to ask you for some time. What was it that started you on the journey to become a director?
I think you have to go back to your childhood and identify those things that influenced you. What reoccurring things happened then?
And very often you'll find the answer, because that's what it was with me. It was movies. Movies were my escape, and I saw them, and then one day it clicked in my mind that somebody is getting paid to do all this stuff I see up on the screen. Yeah. And this hit me at the age of 8 when I saw Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And I said, wow, so this is what I'm going to do. Then I said, okay, I'm going to do this. Whatever this is, however these people do this, I'm going to do this. And I just set my sight on that, you know.
Was there something in particular about Chitty Chitty Bang Bang that inspired you?
Well, here's the thing about Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. You have to look at it in the context of where I saw it and why I saw it and everything else. You know, I came from a very abusive household. My mother's autistic. I'm the child of a rape. And we were brought to Chicago by this man who, looking back now, you realize he had his own mental health issues. But he beat me and my mom and berated us constantly. And I was always looking and seeking escape from that, escape from the poverty I was experiencing on the south side of Chicago. And so I just really got into television at first, but my school had this field trip to go see this movie. And I remember it cost 75 cents for everybody to go. And so I hustled up on 75 cents myself, paid it. And they just said we were going to go see this movie called Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Now, you got to remember, a kid growing up in the hood, I had no idea what it was. I just knew that they said we were all going to go out and see a movie as a class. And so we went downtown to the Esquire Theater in Chicago. And it was a grand old theater, one of those, you know, big grand proscenium arch, you know. It was a grand Baroque theater. So I'm sitting there, and I think I was like in the 8th row. So I'm sitting there totally engulfed by this film, and it was the scale and the mass of it. And me loving cars the way I did, this was about a car that could fly and get you out of danger and take you on adventures. And, you know, I needed to get out of danger and wanted to go on adventure, you know. So that made a huge impact on me. And but it was the grandness of it, because I'll never forget this. It had an intermission. It's the only time I've been to a movie that had an intermission. Like, you know, when they went off the cliff while they were trying to chase Dick Van Dyke's grandfather, when they went off a cliff, the curtains closed and it said intermission. And so we all out in the lobby going, oh my God, what's going to happen? And so, it was this byproduct of this experience. And we come back in and the car and we start where the car is over the cliff and the curtain parts again. And that's when the wings of the car came out and the propeller and everything, and it flew. It defied its odds. It defied its circumstances. Right. And that resonated with me. I'm like, that's what I want to do. So that's why the movie has such an impact on me. And, and you grow up and you learn other things like that was Ian Fleming's only musical. Because, Ian Fleming, who wrote James Bond, wrote Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Yeah, it's amazing. And it's full of innuendo. I mean, you grow up and you learn what Chitty Chitty Bang Bang means. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, exactly.
But then that's really where storytelling first took root with me. And then later, when I was adopted by Dr. Margaret Burroughs, who is the founder of the DeSable Museum of African American History, and she started telling me stories of who I was and the people I came from and everything else. She was like a griot to me. And she, for like 5 or 6 years, I met her when I was like 13, and she poured all this knowledge into me for years and made me a docent to where I was telling stories and giving tours. And I think that's where I first learned my effectiveness at telling stories, because there's this picture that somebody took of me where I'm speaking with this group of young kids, telling them a story about slavery. And they said, just look at the faces of the children. And I looked at the faces of the children in the picture, and they were all white. They were mostly all white, and all their mouths were just like agape, like they couldn't believe what they were hearing. And so, when God continually sets you on a path and you walk in your purpose, he sends signposts and guideposts to let you know you're going in the right direction. Indeed. And so I've been telling, storytelling is crucial to everything I do. You and I had this conversation one time. Your faith is based on stories. Yeah. If you're a Christian, it's because you believe the stories that are in the Bible. They resonate with you and you say, I identify with this, and so I'll follow this. It's the same thing with Islam. It's the same thing with Buddhism. All of these faiths are based on stories. And it's about how those narratives resonate with you that dictate, okay, this is the way I want to live my life. Right. So man has a need for narrative. Back to when, they found drawings on the caves. That was man trying to communicate. That was man trying to tell a story. You look at those early cave drawings and you see it's about the hunt and the winter and everything else. And it's absolutely fascinating.
So out of all the directing that you've done over the years, what was your favorite directing gig?
Oh, there's so many. The one that stands out and that a lot of people ask me about is the time I got to direct Oprah Winfrey for the film that's at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. Right. Because not only what we were directing, but the whole experiencing the whole Oprah paradigm. How she arrived and the measures that had to be taken for her to be there. And then when she did arrive and walked up to me and said, hi, I'm Oprah. Are you Zoe? And I said, yeah, I'm Zoe. I'll be your director for the day. And that
had to be quite an experience.
Oh, it was. And so she said, okay, so what are we doing, Zoe? And I said, okay, well, Oprah, let's come over here. I've got your body double who's going to show you your blocking for your shot. And she looked at me and she said, you got me a double? I said, yeah, this is just we worked out the blocking and everything with her for you. She's like, I know what a double is, so. She's like, I'm just glad you got me one. I said, okay, great. So we had a teleprompter mounted on a camera that was on a crane, because the opening shot is we see her on Front Street, Ripley, and she walks to the camera, and and the camera cranes down with the teleprompter on it. And so Oprah watches the blocking, and she says, make her do it again, Zoe. And I said, could you please do it again? And so we do it, and the camera comes down, and she sees the shot. She watches on the monitor. She's like, okay, I can do that. And before she leaves, she turns and whispers to me. She says, you're the first director to ever get a double whose skin tone is the same as mine. I was like, wow. I said, well, that was by accident. And so she went, and she did the first take, and she said, "How was that, Zoe?" I said, "You kind of flubbed a line. Can we do it again?" And she said, "You noticed that, huh? Okay." And so she went back and she did it, and it was flawless. And she said, "How was that?" I said, "I wouldn't mind one again just to be safe." She's like, "Yeah, just to be safe." I said, "Yeah, I believe in oomphs." She says, what's oomphs?" I said, "One more for safety." And she said, "Okay." All right. And she does it, and it's flawless. And the last time she did it in such a manner that my assistant director had to nudge me and say, "You got to say cut, boss. You got to say cut." Because when that woman opens her mouth and turns it on and lets her full spirit come through, it's something out of this world. I sat there going, I see why she's worth a couple of $1 billion. But that was an experience. Just the whole day with her. Her bodyguard said, "Look, man, I want to tell you something. If she says, let's go, let's get this moving, let's go, that means she ain't feeling you, she ain't feeling this, she's just trying to be a pro and get through it." He says, "But if she likes you, she likes you." And I said, "Oh, okay." So after we got through with the first shot, she said, "What's next?" I'm like, "Well, we're about 10 blocks this way. Let me get your car to take you there." And Miss Winfrey looked at me and said, Zoe, it's a beautiful day. Let's walk." And so Oprah Winfrey takes my hand and we start walking. And so it's like it was like something out of a Disney movie. It's like the whole village saw that Oprah was walking through it. So people started pouring out of their homes and looking out their windows and running up and saying, Oprah, can I get a picture?" And she was like, "Well, I'm walking with my director. We got to get to our next location. But if you could have somebody take it while we walk, sure." And so people started taking pictures as we were walking with Oprah and taking the picture. And it was, and just to see how well she handled it, and so it was just amazing. It was just amazing. My director of photography came to me. His name was Mike Bazzari. And he said, hey, Zoe, my mother's here. My mother, she's 83 years old over here. She loves Oprah. Zoe, do you think she likes you, Zoe? Zoe, she likes you. Do you think you can get her to say hello to my mother? And I'm like, well, I'll see, Mike. So Oprah came out of a house that she went in to look at the owner's behest. And I said, Miss Winfrey, and she leaned in and said, yes. I said, my DP's mother's here. She's 83 years old. And she really wants to say hello to you. Is it okay? And Oprah says, oh, your DP's mom? I'm like, yeah. She's like, of course, bring her. So I bring this little Italian woman, comes walking up, and she walks up to Oprah, and Oprah says, Miss Bazzari? And the little Italian woman jumps on Oprah, grabs her by the neck, and pulls her forward, and then starts, oh my God, I've loved you my whole life. Oh, Oprah, I can't tell you what you mean to me. But just to see how well she treated Mike's mom. And so when it's over, we go on, and I look over and I see Mike is talking to his mother, and then she walks away from him, and then I see his shoulders start to, kind of convulse. So, it's obvious that he was crying. So I walked up to him, and I said, Mike, what's wrong? And he says, there's nothing wrong. My mother just said it's the proudest she's ever been of me.
Oh, wow.
He's, she's like, I never thought in my lifetime you'd be introducing me to Oprah Winfrey, So just that whole experience, seeing the impact she had on the environment, working with her, it was just amazing.
Yeah. Well, while that experience working with Oprah had to have been one of the greatest experiences of your life, you've also had some other great successes in life. I mean, you are a 26-time Regional Emmy Award winner. I mean, tell us about that. I'm really fascinated to know maybe what was your favorite Emmy that you won.
Maybe the one last year. I did a documentary on Nelson Mandela for where we worked together for the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. And it was a really hard documentary to pull off because Freedom Center came to me and said, we want to do this documentary on Nelson Mandela because we have this photo exhibit done on him here, and we want a documentary to go along with it. And I was kind of like, guys, Nelson Mandela has like 15 films, and countless documentaries done about him. I don't know how I can tell the story any better, but they were insistent. So I found a way. I found a way to tell it. I found a way to tell the story utilizing just about every bit of footage I could get on him. But the key, and I think you might like this, I had been very impressed, like just about everybody else was, by the Black Panther, by the film The Black Panther.
Oh, yeah.
And so what I tried to do in this documentary is kind of frame Nelson Mandela as the original Black Panther.
Oh, yeah.
The original superhero from Africa.
Right.
You know, and pointed out things like in the Black Panther, they all spoke Xhosa. You know, they spoke with the same South African language that Nelson Mandela spoke. And when you hear them all, they're speaking with, Xhosa accents and everything else. And I'm like, that line, I thought that was very interesting, that they were tying, like the language of Nelson Mandela to being the language of Wakanda, you know. And I said, and since that character is so top of mind for young people now, that if I approach it in that way, I might be able to get their attention for them to look at Nelson Mandela. Because a lot of young kids didn't know who he was. But for me to position it as, no, this is the original superhero from Africa, it made a lot of resonate. It resonated a lot with our young people. And so the great moment for me was my editor, whose name is Jonathan Nosp, who's white. And he brought his kids into the editing suite. They would come to go to a ball game or something, and they wanted to see what Daddy was doing. So we played them the opening of the film, and I think it was his 10-year-old son who said, "Gee, Dad, this is like the Black Panther." And I said, "I did my job. I did my job."
And you actually won an Emmy for that.
Yeah, I won an Emmy for this documentary. It's called Mandela Prepared to Die.
That's
and
great.
It was one of the great moments. And I wish we were still working together. We probably will. But the director of the Freedom Center at the time, Dion Brown, he was one of the executive producers on it. So he got nominated. So he won an Emmy. The executive director of the Freedom Center won an Emmy. And it was great to be able to put that into his hands and to the hands of his deputy director, who was an African-American woman. And that's what I get the most joy in taking people to the Emmys and exposing them to that great honor, more than I do even winning myself. Because, I think we're supposed to take people with us on our journey to greatness. It shouldn't just be a solitary, endeavor. And so, I'm really grateful. We'll find out next month if I'm nominated for any more, because I just did a documentary for the Cincinnati Police Department called Shoot This, Not That, which tells the story of this program the department has that puts cameras in the hands of the victims of gun violence and lets them tell the stories of their lost loved ones. It's a very powerful documentary, and it's had a great impact in the city of Cincinnati and other parts of the country, and it's been shown. So
that's great. In fact, I was going to ask you about how Cincinnati was doing with its police department, and to some extent, you're telling us that they have understood the power of storytelling, and they are using storytelling to get the message across about gun violence, and that's incredible in itself.
Yeah. Karen D. Ramsey and Sergeant Jennifer Mitch, they're the ones who spearhead the program. They give these young people cameras, work with them for weeks. They go back to the places where they lost their loved ones, take the pictures, tell the story. It's therapy for these kids because they had no outlet and how to deal with the pain. But by giving them a camera, it gives them a way of generating a narrative by touching on the old narrative, but almost creating it anew by creating their own narrative by telling their stories. Yeah. So it's a very powerful program. They're to be commended.
One of the reasons I was really excited about having you on the show, Zoe, was to ask you, as a director, what's the difference between a director telling a story as opposed to, say, a writer or a screenwriter? How does a director tell a story, and how does a writer tell a story? I mean, I know they have to work together, but From a director's point of view, I'd really like to hear what you have to say.
Well, I think back to a quote that I believe is from Irving Thalberg, when he said, the writer is the most important aspect of telling a story and of making a film, and the most important aspect. And it is our job to make sure that they never understand
that. That's great.
You know?
I can see that.
Yeah, because I mean, without them, you got nothing. If it ain't on the page, it ain't on the stage. So without a writer, you got nothing. And so the writer, I believe that, is the most important aspect of telling a story. Then you have the director. Sometimes they're one and the same, but let's look at the scenario of there's a writer and then a director and a producer and everything else. Then it's the producer and the director's job to take said story and to figure out what's the best way of telling the story by how it resonates with them. Because I usually, unless I'm getting paid for it, I usually only try to get involved with projects that resonate with me, that speak with me. Like Martin Scorsese said, that I can find my voice in. So I always like to say it like this, you know, it's a saying that a film is made, 3 or 4 times. Once when it's written, once when it's directed, and again when it's edited. I was just talking with a young man, I'm executive producing a project for him today, and he's out shooting. I said, well, you know, you're getting the groceries, but when we get into editing, that's when we're going to start cooking.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, you're getting the ingredients, but where we start cooking is in the editing suite. I said, we got to have really good ingredients, though. We got to have the best stuff, you know. But I said, but understand that you have to learn to shoot for the edit. You have to learn to shoot so it cuts together and makes sense. And I always tell people who say, well, I want to be a producer. How do I learn? I say, well, go get in an editing suite somewhere and watch all the choices that were made on the set, because that's where everything shows up. That's where every good choice shows up and where every bad choice shows up. Where every good decision shows up and every bad decision shows up is in editing. So if you really want to understand producing, go get in the editing suite. You know, being on sets is great, but in the editing suite, that's where you see everything play out.
So what would you tell a young person today who wants to get involved in directing and telling a story with film?
I would tell them to respect the craft and not just think because you can turn on your camera phone that I'm a director, or because you go out and buy a camera and get a gimbal or something, now I'm a director. I get so much material that's given to me by people of all ages, but a lot of young people. And I'm always hitting them with, you do not understand the fundamentals of directing and of storytelling. And I said, I can't even understand what you're trying to tell me because your cinematic language is so bad. It gets in the way of me understanding what it is you're trying to say.
When you say cinematic language, what do you mean?
I mean, they don't understand the 180 rule, meaning that, you know, how you shoot a scene where you establish a line of axis and you stay on one side of the line of axis and shoot that way. But if you do decide you're going to change your line of axis, then, okay, you shoot another shot from the other side of the line of axis, but the shot that comes after it should be on that same different line of axis. You shouldn't shoot a scene on one line of axis and then with a character, and then you cut and you put the camera on another side of the line of axis. And so now both characters are looking in the same direction.
Yeah, I understand.
They don't, I'm like, what? Why are they both looking in the same direction and they're supposed to be talking to each other? Just simple things like that. Or you don't understand getting a basic exposure in a shot. Can I get just a little light? Right. This one guy sent me some stuff. He's shooting black people at night and there ain't no light nowhere. I'm like, how am I supposed to see what the hell's going on? And you don't have, you couldn't turn on your flashlight on your phone and use that to get a little exposure. Anything, but get some exposure. You know, I mean, it's basics, but everybody feels like, no, hey, I can turn on my camera and I'm a director.
Haven't there been films that have been done entirely on an iPhone?
Like Tangerine.
Right.
Tangerine was a film that was shot entirely on an iPhone about these two transvestites in L.A.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant film, but that was shot by a filmmaker, by a director.
Uh-huh.
He understood the line of axis. He understood camera movement. He understood all of that. He just used iPhones. He could do it so much better now because iPhones are better now than when he did it. I think Tangerine was 8 years ago or something.
Yeah,
so yeah, I love the fact that we all have cameras now, and in light of recent events, a young girl, a 17-year-old girl with a camera phone shooting George Floyd, having the life choked out of him, is what sparked this movement. Had there not been somebody with the courage to stand there with a camera and film that atrocity, we wouldn't be seeing what we're seeing now. Nor will we be seeing everybody all of a sudden saying we support Black lives, and all these major corporations and everything saying, there's a discrepancy here that's long overdue for us to address. Without somebody standing there with a phone and with a camera, that wouldn't have happened. What I'm saying is, when you're trying to tell a narrative story, be it short or long, I have a hard time getting what you're saying if you're not respecting the craft of storytelling and of direction and good camera work.
Is there a place where young people can go and get trained and get that knowledge and understanding that you're talking about?
Well, there's a website called No Film School that I like. It's called No Film School. I would highly recommend anybody check it out. It has so many tutorials and so much cinematic history and contemplation and everything on it. I would highly recommend that. And there are tons of tutorials on YouTube. You can just go to YouTube and type in 180 rule, and you'll get all these tutorials that'll come up and teach you about what the 180 rule is and what lenses do and camera movement and everything. The information's out there. I tell a lot of young people, if you're stupid now in this age, it's a choice.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. Well, this is why our podcast is called Life is a Story. We tell ourselves. And you were mentioning the young woman with the phone.
Yes.
And what she filmed, the tragedy that she filmed. And now we are able to see in real time the stories that we're writing. And sometimes those stories are ugly.
Oh, yeah.
But they're a reflection. And so part of what we mean on this podcast about life is a story we tell ourselves is about how stories are a reflection of ourselves, and when you can take something like an iPhone or a camera and film something as horrific as that, or something as beautiful as a sunset, or something as lovely as a wedding, these stories begin to come to life, and we can see ourselves. Yes. And that's what's happening, I think, in America right now, is because of that story that was told in graphic detail in that particular instant. Yes. Now America is getting a chance to see itself.
Yes. But you being the student of history like I am, the reason the civil rights movement that Dr. King led had so much impact is because every night it was being broadcast into the homes of middle America. They were seeing people being hosed and attacked by dogs and beaten. It was coming in over their television sets. These stories were being told with pictures that way. And that's what really moved people to say, this isn't right, we need to do something. So it always starts with media. That's where it really gets the big push, is with media. Well, what did Malcolm X said? That the media is the most powerful entity in the world because it controls the minds of the masses. Mm-hmm. That's what we're seeing now. So just like, it coming across the 5 or 6 o'clock news back then, it being broadcast now all over the media, because it can't be ignored. It can't be denied. And I've always said, Gordon Parks said, choose your weapon wisely. He said this to a Black Panther. He says, for you, it's that gun, and he says, I understand why you're carrying it. He says, but for me, it's this camera that's in my lap. And he said, I would offer that this camera is much more of a powerful weapon than that. This camera is, imagery,
Right.
getting at the truth visually is a very powerful tool to be used on the side of righteousness.
Indeed. Tell us a little bit about how you got started in directing. What inspired you?
I started out in theater. When I was in third grade, my teacher said, "Oh, he speaks so well. Let's give," so I was the narrator in basically all my school plays. And I always got a good response. And you're up on stage and you're a little kid. And when it's over, people run up to you and tell you what a good job you did. And I said, I need this kind of positive reinforcement in my life before I go back home and get the hell beat out of me by that bastard who's raising me. So that's where it started. And then I studied acting and got into directing theater. And then I started directing theater in the housing projects of Chicago at the Robert Taylor Homes. Somebody saw an adaptation of Hamlet that I did that was hip hop based.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I taught the young people that Shakespeare was written in unrhyming iambic pentameter, which is a rhythm. And I said, so, that's not so far removed from what you're doing and writing in different rhythms. And so we adapted Hamlet to hip hop. And somebody saw that and they invited me to come and start directing some commercials and that kind of thing. And then that was my first way of getting into directing. And then I got with this company in Chicago called Urban Ministries Incorporated. And they distributed Bible study materials and Christian materials and vocation Bible school materials to at that time, 20,000 Black churches. And they said, we believe video is really going to enhance our sales with VBS, with Vacation Bible School. And so I did a video for them called Through the Cracks. And it went in Vacation Bible School, but I also got it aired in Chicago. And in 1989, it was nominated for an Emmy and it won. And so that was my first Emmy win, was in Chicago in 1989. And I love that piece and the pieces I did with Urban Ministry subsequently beforehand, because they were all shot in Chicago, all with Chicago talent. Now, here's how things come full circle. I'm on the set of the TV show The Chi. It's executive produced by Lena Waithe and Common. It's on Showtime. So I'm on the set there, and I'm an observing director. And as we're watching a cut in the lunchroom during one of the breaks, the actors come in to go through the line. And then one of the actors stops in his tracks and says, "Alphonzo Wesson." And I looked at him and I knew who he was. His name's Cedric. He's a very talented actor. I'm like, "Yeah, how you doing, Cedric?" He's like, "Man, I'm an actor now because of you." I said, "I'm sorry, what?" He says, "Listen, my father was a pastor and he wouldn't let us watch secular television. So all we had to watch were all the videos and stories and everything that you shot for Urban Ministries." And he rattled off them all, Through the Cracks and Crackdown and Grandpa Griot and all these things that you had shot and created. And he said, and I watched those over and over again, and I always looked at the credits, and I realized that was shot in Chicago with people from Chicago who looked like me. And so I said, if they can do it, I can do it. And now here I am on the set of The Chi on Showtime.
That's a beautiful story.
Oh, yeah. See, but when you walk in your purpose, God is so good. And you being the storyteller and the educator that you are, you know that what we do, we really don't know where our influence ends. It's like being a teacher. A teacher never knows where their influence ends. And when you're a storyteller and you have a heart for people and education and enlightenment, you never know where your influence is going to end. So I had no idea that young man would walk up on me and say, "You're the reason I'm here today."
So, Zoe, tell us what director influenced you the most.
Well, first is Gordon Parks.
Yeah.
I met Gordon Parks in Cincinnati, and it was one of the greatest days of my life, Don. One of the greatest days of my life. I got invited to sit at his table for dinner. I was just happy that he signed my Shaft poster. I was just happy that he signed that. And I was out to my car, putting it in my car, because I wasn't invited to the dinner afterwards. I had just been there for the press conference. one of the organizers of the dinner came running out and says, you're the filmmaker, right? I said, yes, which was an honor to be called that itself. Anytime I'm regarded as a filmmaker, I take it as an honor. I really do. Because never in my life growing up being abused that I think anybody would ever call me a filmmaker or a director. She's like, well, Gordon wants to have dinner with you. I'm like, what? She says, yeah, somebody dropped out and there's a seat next to him. And he says, who is that young fellow with the Shaft poster? And she said, well, that's a filmmaker. He's like, go get it. So I come in and I sit down next to Gordon Parks and he's talking with people and then he turns to me and he says, so you're a filmmaker, huh? I said, yes, sir. He says, all right. Ask me a question only a filmmaker would ask me. Wow. I said, okay. In the opening credits of Shaft, you didn't have a permit to shoot in Times Square, did you? And he stopped and he looked at me. He's like, why do you say that? I'm like, because all your shots were stolen. You were shooting from cars going by and from buildings and all kinds of stuff. I said, you were on the street, but very limited. I said, it looked like to me you didn't have a permit, that you were trying to shoot that opening guerrilla style. And Gordon Parks looked at me and laughed and said, you're right, young fella. I didn't have no permit to shoot in Times Square, but I was going to get it done anyway. And then he just opened up his heart to me. That man talked to me all through dinner, just like unloading wisdom, stuff that he had learned and saying, never let anybody get in your way, and saying when somebody says, oh, I would love to hire you, but I'm looking for somebody who could direct Shakespeare. He says, well, pull out of your pocket a book of Shakespeare. So I got some right here. He says, because that's what he said he always carried a book. And so it was one of the greatest moments of my life. I mean, to have your hero validate you and say, yes, you are this. And because I see this, now I will share my wisdom with you. One of the greatest days of my life.
That's amazing. What a great story, and a perfect place to end this conversation. Thank you, Zoe, for being with us on the podcast. Life is a story we tell ourselves. We hope you'll come back and tell us more stories about your life as a director and storyteller.
You have but to ask, old friend.
Well, thanks, Zoe, and be well, my friend, and stay safe.
You too, my brother.
Thank you for listening to this week's Life is a Story We Tell Ourselves. Please remember to subscribe and share with your family and friends. Join us for a special episode in honor of Father's Day airing later this week. From our family to yours, stay safe, share happiness, and remember, the important thing is not to stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for